Canoe, written by Susan Specht Oram and narrated by Laura Jennings. Chapter 1. Swimming. When I was about 5 years old, I waded into Lake St. Clair in Michigan on a summer day. My mother sat on the beach reading. My 2 older twin brothers weren't there. I don't recall a lifeguard being on duty at the little beach next to a park. I wandered out into the lake, feeling my way along on the muddy bottom. The water level rose up to my knees, my thighs, and hips. All of a sudden, the ground dropped off beneath my feet. My heart raced and I tried to doggy paddle back to where I could stand, but I sank down into the murky water, clawing and gasping for air. A red 2-piece swimsuit swam by, and I grabbed onto the swimsuit bottom with an iron grip, grasping it with all my might. She struggled and tried to push me off, but I held on. She dragged me to shallow water, plunking me down. My chest heaved and I blinked back tears. She spluttered. "You dragged me down. Why'd you do that? I almost drowned." Tears streamed down my cheeks. "It was too deep. Don't go in there if you can't swim." She stormed off into the water, and I stood slack-jawed and trembling. I glanced back at the beach, where my mother was bent over a book, turning the pages. I never told her what happened. Chapter 2. Canoe. My earliest memory is of a girl being carried away down a long, dark tunnel. I reached out to save her, but I couldn't stop what was happening. She was gone, and I was alone. As a child, I had what I called gray dreams that I told no one about, reliving that moment and waking up weeping in the mornings, struck by a chord of losing a dear friend. Images of a girl disappearing, despite my trying to rescue her, haunted my dreams. One day, when I was a teenager, my mother mentioned how she had carried a heavy wooden canoe when she was 3 or 4 months pregnant with me. She bled and lost the baby. A doctor told her she had miscarried, but a few weeks later, she discovered she was still pregnant with a child, who turned out to be me. Some experts believe children retain memories from being in the womb, like seeing my twin pulled away in utero. When my own twins were little, I overheard my daughter say to my son, "You kicked me when we were in Mama's belly. Stop it." Chapter 3. My father's secret twin. My father took me aside one day and told me a story about his being a twin. I don't recall if this was when I was growing up with twin brothers and asking pesky questions, or if it was after I gave birth to twins. If you ask my mother about this, she'll say she doesn't remember this, but here is the story Dad told me at least 2 times. He was sitting in our backyard in a suburb of Detroit with his parents, who were visiting from Colorado. My older brothers were just born, and Dad said to his folks how it was amazing he and my mom had twin boys, because twins don't run in the family. My grandmother grew silent and dabbed at tears in her eyes. My grandfather, a tough Army career man who had been missing in action for 2 years in the South Pacific during World War II, blinked back tears. Dad asked what was going on, and my grandmother said, "Eddie, you were a twin, but we didn't tell you. Your twin was stillborn and desiccated at birth." Dad emphasized the word desiccated each time he told the story, and I had to look it up in the dictionary the first time I heard it. It means dried up. He blinked back tears and told me how he grew up missing a boy he had played with when he was young, but the child left. My father was a man of facts, and he felt the loss of his dead twin brother. I'm glad Dad told me his tale, but I never said I also had an emotional memory of my missing twin. It was his story, and he rarely shared naked emotions, so I wanted to be a blank canvas for him and just listen. I said, "I believe you. Thank you for telling me." After my father's memorial service, a family member asked my mother if Dad had a twin. Mom said she hadn't heard this story from my dad, and maybe she wasn't present during the discussion in the backyard when my brothers were babies. I'd like to go back in time and take him aside, telling him I understood because it happened to me. But it's too late to do that now, and all we have left are his ashes. Chapter 4. Pottery Kiln. When I was married to a man we'll call Starlight, because we met on a night when the stars were out and meteor showers filled the sky. I moved my pottery studio home when my gift shop studio floundered. Sales slacked off at my shop because the concept of simplified living without giving gifts spread on Finney Ridge in Seattle, where many of my customers lived, and the city replaced the sewer line in front of my shop, closing the street for months. My customers shopped elsewhere. Our marriage bumped along, despite him saying he had a secret with the babysitter. I asked what it was, but he wouldn't tell me. I was taking care of our kids, making pottery and writing. If we went out with other couples, he told me to only mention I was a mother. I tried it at dinner downtown before a show, when a well-dressed woman asked what I did, and hearing my reply, she turned to the person next to her and ignored me the rest of the evening. One day, I checked our bank balance with the hopes that we'd saved enough to dump the problematic car I was driving, which broke down on I-90 when I was with our kids. Another time, a man pointed to my car and yelled, "Your car is leaking gas." I took it to a mechanic, who confirmed the gas tank was leaking. When I told my then-husband, he shrugged, said he suspected as much. I checked our savings account balance to see how close we were to buying a different, used car for me. A bank teller told me the account had $30. I said, "But we had over $10,000 in the account. Please, check again." She pursed her lips and nodded, looking at a computer screen. Yes, the savings account has $30 in it. What happened? Was there a withdrawal? I didn't take money out. She cleared her throat. The other account holder withdrew $10,000, but at least he left you some. My mouth fell open. Can you get the money back? I didn't authorize it. She shook her head. It's a joint account, and the other account holder has the right to withdraw money. I gritted my teeth and left. When I slept, I dreamed of being in prison. I packed a go bag for myself and my kids and stored it at a friend's house. When I confronted him about the withdrawal from our joint savings account, a slight smile flickered across his face before he wiped it away. He said, "I thought you were acting crazy, so I did it." I filed for divorce. One evening, I went into the garage to check on a kiln I was firing. I put my hands on my hips and stared. The kiln was unplugged from the wall. Only one other person, the man I was married to, had access to this locked space. I bent down, plugging in the kiln, and started the firing from the beginning, slowly warming clay pots and bringing them up to bisque temperature. From then on, I watched his movements to make sure he wouldn't sneak into the garage and sabotage a kiln firing. When I confronted him, he shrugged and walked away in an ultimate power play, wielding silence as a weapon. My lawyer drew up divorce papers. A publisher asked for a manuscript with my essays for possible publication. Sleeping in a separate bedroom, I'd look out the leaded glass windows and send a wish and a prayer that all would be right and bright for my children's future, and somehow we'd manage to start a new life. Weeks later, I served him divorce papers and went out to the garage, where I was firing a kiln full of vases and bowls. A fierce red-orange glow blazed in the crack between the kiln lid and the thick walls. I'd never seen the kiln this hot before. My eyes darted around for the source of the trouble and landed on a board leaning against the firing mechanism, blocking it from falling and automatically shutting off the kiln when it reached temperature. I shoved the board aside, and the metal mechanism dropped down with a thud. I clicked off temperature dials on each of the 3 levels, but it was far too late. I knew from working at a group studio that the pottery inside the kiln, and maybe even the shelves, had probably melted. Crying wouldn't help, but distance would. I stomped into the house and screamed at him to move out. The next day, I opened the kiln and found melted pots and slumping ceramic shelves, which I tossed in the trash. My divorce attorney called soon after to say I was asking for too much. I shouldn't need childcare for 3 hours a day to job search in quiet. I changed lawyers and learned from a mutual friend that my lawyer typically sided with men in divorce cases because of what happened to her husband during his divorce. It takes 2 people to make a marriage fall apart, and I know I wasn't a perfect partner. Years later, I wrote a letter to Starlight Man, apologizing for my part, but I never heard back. When I take our dog on walks now, I glance across the water to a nearby island, where my former in-laws' ashes are scattered, I was told, at the top of a hill. I nod and continue on my way, breathing in briny air and feeling grateful that I got away to start a new life. I never did find out what his secret was, by the way, with the babysitter, but maybe it's better not to know. Chapter 5. Halibut. When my twins left for college years later, I moved into my trumpet-playing boyfriend's house. I came home from working at a biotechnology company in Seattle, greeted a parent waiting in the living room, and tossed my purse on a chair in the kitchen. In the music studio across the hall, a fifth-grade student honked and wheezed his way through a trumpet lesson. I rolled up my sleeves and started to make dinner so it would be ready when Jerry finished teaching for the day. In the tiny kitchen, I pulled a packet of halibut from the freezer and followed cooking instructions on the package. I used whatever was in the refrigerator, and soon the kitchen was filled with pungent battling fumes of baking fish, boiling cauliflower, and instant mashed potatoes from a box in the pantry cupboard. The studio door opened. A student clomped down the hall to the living room, and I heard the mother speaking with Jerry before the front door closed. The house grew quiet. Dinner odors hung heavy in the air. I turned off the burners under the mashed potatoes and cauliflower, opened the oven door and checked the fish, nodding to myself. It was a strange, smelly dinner, but he was going to be happy I had cooked. This was the beginning of a wonderful life together. He came in the kitchen, wrinkled his nose, waved a hand in front of his face, and flipped on the fan above the stove. "What's that smell?" I smiled. "I made dinner." I served up fish, cauliflower, and mashed potatoes, setting down plates at a two-person kitchen table. A dog next door barked from his position on the outside back steps. Jerry thanked me for making dinner and took a bite of fish, slowly chewing. I did the same, and found the halibut tasteless with an unfortunate rubbery texture. He swallowed several times and coughed, looking like he might throw up. He spit something into his napkin. "Maybe it needs to cook more." I set my fork down. "It tastes freezer-burned. How long have you had it?" He stood, putting his portion of fish back on a baking sheet. "I have no idea. It could have been years, because I hate fish. Do you want yours cooked more?" He baked the rubbery halibut longer, but it didn't improve the flavor or texture. Glancing at each other over plates filled with pungent, overcooked cauliflower, bland mashed potatoes, and slabs of freezer-burned fish, we stood and dumped our dinners into the trash can under the sink. The dog next door barked with disapproval. But the story has a happy ending, because we were married and moved to a small town, where Jerry cooks delicious dinners, leaving me with time to write. The all-white meal, I say every 6 months or so. "Wasn't it awful?" "It was," he replies. "I never want to eat that again." Chapter 6. Drawing on the floor. My fraternal twins were boisterous, and I had to watch them carefully, or trouble would break out. But one afternoon, the phone rang, and I chatted for 10 minutes with a writer who didn't think I should be published until I earned a master's degree in creative writing. My children were laughing and loud in the next room. I watched them and listened to my friend talk. She said, "Can't you make them be quiet?" "I've tried, but it doesn't work. They're just loud. Gotta go." "Can't you talk for 20 minutes?" I shook my head. "I can't, sorry." I hung up and glanced in the sunroom, where my two were sitting on the floor. When I went closer, I gasped. They'd drawn in oil pastels on the new engineered hardwood floor, using swoopy artistic lines. I frowned and shook a finger at them. "We don't draw on the floor." Little did I know they had more mischief in store for me. Chapter 7. Skating on butter. Another time, when my red-cheeked, chubby-fingered twins were 3 years old, nature's urge hit, and I rushed to the bathroom saying, "I'll be right out." I heard squeals of delight through the closed bathroom door and rolled my eyes. What were those two up to? It took me back to my childhood, growing up with twin brothers uniting against me in a 2-against-1 dynamic. I washed my hands, strode into the kitchen, and skidded, almost falling back on my butt on the slippery surface. My mouth fell open, and I gripped the edge of the counter. "What did you do?" My daughter smiled. "We skated on the floor." My son grinned and held up a mostly used stick of butter. "Using butter?" I looked at the ceiling and thought, give me strength. I was running on fumes because my daughter woke up screaming every few hours at night, and I'd go running down the hall to see what was wrong. We did this room too, my kid said, pointing to the dining room wood floor, and over there. The sunroom floor was once again smeared with a substance, but this time, instead of oil pastels, they'd used butter. I groaned and rested my head in my hands. They were speedy, whipping around and moving fast. I was raising wild animals, and I needed to be a better circus trainer. Photos taken in those days show my son a foot off the ground. They were jumping and hopping, fleet of foot and joyous. When I taught them to meditate, they calmed down, and I wrote about it in what became one of my first published essays. Chapter 8. Meditating with Tumbling Toddlers. When my twins were babies, I considered meditating but chose to sleep instead. Over time, however, I became restless. I realized that I had forgotten how to focus and quiet my thoughts. So when my children had their second birthdays, I thought, enough, time to start again, and I returned to meditation. At first, I thought that meant being alone in silence. But now, after 2 years of meditating and being a parent, I have become more flexible. I am willing to include my children as I sit, and I have also grown accustomed to their interruptions. Early on, when my son and daughter played after breakfast, I tried to sneak off alone, but they sensed my absence and sought me out. They knocked on the closed bedroom door and then walked in. I explained what I was doing and ushered them out. They bickered noisily in the hall, their voices amplified by the walls and wood floor. After a few attempts, I began to meditate while they slept, but I missed the time of sitting quietly after breakfast. When I skipped meditation in the morning, I noticed that I often became lightheaded from the commotion of getting the kids off to preschool. When I tried to meditate, my children were drawn to me, attracted by the rarity of my sitting still, and by their power of interrupting a silent person. Until I began to blend meditating with parenting, I had always busied myself around them with constant tasks, folding laundry, washing dishes, or getting ready to go out. One day, I decided to experiment. I told my kids, after breakfast you can join me in my room to meditate, if you're quiet and polite. Then I went into my bedroom and sat on a small red rug. My children tiptoed into the room, and I welcomed them. Together, we sat cross-legged, or crisscross applesauce, as they call it. We whooshed air out of our lungs and sat abreast facing the window facing west. They enjoyed being included in my ritual and sat silently for 4 or 5 minutes. This went on for a few months, but by then my children's curiosity was sated and the novelty was gone. They began to talk while I focused on a far pine tree. Short silences were sliced by arguments about who would sit on which side of me. Hushing them had little effect. I realized then that if I was strident about absolute quiet, the idea of meditating might become negative. Instead, I decided to appreciate even 2-minute silent meditation. I'm now willing to let the children sit on my lap or bump against my knee as they settle into centering. After more than a year of meditating for a few minutes at a time, my children know how to slow their breath and relax if they are sick or upset. Once while vacationing in California, we discovered a sliver in my daughter's foot. Seeing swelling and redness, we took her to the hospital, where an emergency room doctor examined her foot. He strode off to gather staff to hold down her foot so he could remove the splinter. When the doctor left the room, I told her, "If you use your deep breathing and relax, they probably won't hold you down." Like many of us, she doesn't like to be restrained. She let the air flow from her lung and slowly breathed in. The doctor returned with tweezer, a scalpel, a magnifying glass, and 3 assistants. I said, "I'd like you to try this first without holding her down. She knows how to breathe deeply and relax." The doctor lifted his eyebrows and looked at my 3-year-old daughter. "Okay, we'll try it." He dug into her trembling foot and freed the sliver. She remained calm, while the 3 helpers stood by unneeded. Many benefits have come from sitting together. My children have learned that they can calm themselves, and I've learned that within 2 or 3 minutes, I can focus and become centered and relaxed. Now that I'm a mother, meditation time has become more valuable for me, even when I share it with tumbling toddlers. Previously published in Mothering magazine. Chapter 9. Joe is married today. My twins were taking a nap one afternoon, and I sat in a sunbeam on the wood floor, crossing my legs, slowly breathing. Looking out the window at a blue sky, I emptied my mind, but a strange stray thought flitted through my mind. Joe is married today. I blinked and stared at an apple tree, shaking my head. That was odd. Where did that thought come from? I hadn't spoken to my high school boyfriend in 8 or 10 years. I wrote it off as bizarre and carried on with my life. But I did note the date. It was April 28th, or thereabouts, when the weird thought snaked through my mind. 2 months later, I was selling my paintings and pottery at the Fremont Fair. A man came up to me and turned out to be a former high school friend from Michigan. He mentioned our mutual friend, Joe, and how he'd recently been married. I held up an index finger. Did he get married on or around April 28th by chance? Our mutual friend's jaw dropped. He leaned in. How did you know? You must have heard it somewhere. I shook my head. No, we haven't been in touch for years. It just came to me one day. If you see him, tell him hi from me. He shuddered. That's just spooky if you ask me. He turned and walked away, blending into the crowd passing by. Chapter 10. Prediction. When I told my maternal grandmother that I was getting married to my college boyfriend, she didn't miss a beat before saying, "You'll divorce, mark my words." I gripped the telephone tight, believing she had a powerful gift of intuition. Before the Great Depression, she had pleaded with my grandfather to move their money from a U.S. bank to a Canadian bank, which he did, 2 days before the stock market crashed. I said in a teary voice, "Why did you say that?" "You come from different religions. It won't work. When you divorce, come to me and I'll help you." I hung up and put my head in my hands, weeping. How could someone who loved me put a curse on our marriage? She refused to attend the wedding, so we went ahead without her, holding it in a Seattle park looking over the water. It began to rain before the service, little drops drizzling down, and the violinists we hired moved their chairs and played from under the branches of a tree. For some strange reason, we decided to hold the reception many miles away at a now burned-down mountaineer lodge on Snoqualmie Pass. It was a pain for everyone to get there, including the polka band. The chocolate fountain was a hit, as was my sister-in-law's fabulous cake. Our honeymoon started in Victoria, Canada, and we bicycled for miles, camping along the way. But years later, we split up for many reasons, and I dialed my grandmother's number with trembling hands from a studio apartment, where I shared the kitchen with a sturdy family of cockroaches who refused to be evicted. After we said hello, I told her we'd broken up and were divorcing. I said in a tight voice, looking down on the bank building next door, "You said when we divorced you'd help me out with money. Could you please do that? I need your help." She said in a crisp, clear voice, "I can't do that. It wouldn't be right. If I did, I'd have to help all my grandchildren." She hung up, and I glanced around my tiny apartment, which housed my booth and boxes of pottery and a fold-out sofa bed. I nodded to myself. I was going to find a way to rebuild my life somehow, some way, without her help. My grandmother and her cousins, the cockroaches, couldn't hold me back. Chapter 11. Electrical Current. We walked side by side during a dinner break during a 2-day conference, passing a group pottery studio by Seattle Center where I'd once worked. I glanced at a spot in a parking lot by the brick building where 3 men lifted my friend Gary's motorcycle onto a pickup truck, stealing it, despite it being locked up with chains. But I didn't mention it to my walking companion. We'd just met at the meeting, and I didn't want to babble or bring up personal remembrances. We walked past what was then the Coliseum, and he said, "I'm a masseuse, but it's been difficult. Not many clients like my touch." I cringed. Was I walking with a weirdo? Maybe I needed to cut the break short and hoof it back to the conference early. But the fresh air felt good, after sitting inside for so long, and he seemed like an okay guy, despite my imagination racing ahead into dark wooded areas where I'd end up dead and laid out on a morgue slab. Plus, I was curious. "What do you mean?" I asked, wondering if his hands were coarse and calloused, or his fingers were sweaty. It was a strange conversation, but I wanted to know what was wrong. He said, "Dating is difficult for the same reason." I frowned. This was definitely weird. I picked up my pace but said, "Why?" He kept up with me, striding easily, matching me step for step. "I give off a magnetic field." I stopped under a streetlight and stared at this regular-looking guy with brown hair and brown eyes, wearing a jacket, jeans, and sneakers. He could be anyone. He didn't stand out. He looked absolutely normal in every way. "You do?" "Yeah." "Really?" He nodded, holding up his hands. "People feel a shock when I touch them, like an electrical zap." My jaw dropped open. I finally said, "That would make it difficult to be a masseuse, I guess." He swallowed, and his Adam's apple bobbed up and down. "Can I try it on you?" My eyebrows shot up. "Okay, I guess." I tensed my muscles, bracing myself. "Go ahead." "Here we go." He slowly raised his left hand and gently touched my shoulder. With a sudden zap, a jolt of electrical current raced through me. I flinched and frowned at the unfamiliar sensation. It was jarring, mysterious, and most unpleasant. He shook his head. "I had to try. Sorry about that." I stepped back. "Wow, that was something. I felt it, but I wouldn't want to do it again. It's amazing you can do that." "It's a hassle to live with. When I touch electrical appliances, they stop working." "That sounds awful, but thanks for telling me about it." "I don't share it with many people. They react like you did and don't like it." "It sounds like a burden and a gift." He issued a choked chuckle. "Except I can't find how to use it." We walked back to the conference we were attending at Seattle Center and never saw each other again. I think of him and his special gift now and then, because for a few years, my dad bragged about how he gave off an electrical current. He said he turned off blood pressure monitors, EKG machines, and other medical equipment just by walking into a room. But when I asked him about that 6 months before he died, he acted like he'd never told those stories. I've heard human bodies have electrical fields, but some of us must have higher voltage than the rest. The man walking down the street with me that evening didn't have a buildup of electrons on his skin from friction. He was always like that, he said, and what a burden it must have been. It's too bad we didn't keep in touch because years later, I met a woman with a similar ability who sends out shocks from her fingers. Watches don't work on her wrist. Computers last a year, if that. Maybe those two would have gotten on well and had babies who sent out currents of electricity through their chubby little fingers. I hope he found happiness, alone on an island with his electrical field and a special gift that few wanted to share. Chapter 12. Angel's Wings. I sidled up to a 4-year-old girl in my summer clay camp. She was bent over the table, frowning and forming something. I glanced at my watch. Parents were due any minute to pick up their kids. She'd been quiet all day and had missed class the day before. I bent down and said, "You look like you're making something very special." She nodded but didn't look over, her little fingers carefully smoothing out the red terracotta clay. She whispered something that I couldn't hear, so I said in a soft voice, "I didn't hear you. What did you say?" "I'm making angel's wings. My nanny died." I pursed my lips and was quiet for a beat, not expecting to hear that. "Well, you're doing a good job. Keep it up." She whispered, "I'm almost finished." When her mom came in later, I took her aside and told her what her daughter had said. Her eyes grew wide. "She told you that?" I nodded. "She did. Did someone die?" "Her nanny died a few days ago. It's hit her harder than I knew." She put her arm around her little girl and they left, walking out slowly, leaning against each other. I wonder if that death left a mark on the child that would remain for the rest of her life, because of something that I saw one day at summer camp. I ditched a camp in Georgian Bay, Ontario, when I wasn't awarded a pine tree pin and someone else received it. I see you, Susanna Green. Instead, I went to summer camp in Wisconsin and landed a part in the musical Oklahoma, where I sang off key and was flat. Birds sang. A meadow was beautiful. We played mumbly peg, throwing pocket knives into the dirt. One day the bell rang, announcing a group of campers coming back from a canoeing trip. On a typical day, the bell rang, and we'd rush down to the river to wave to the returning group and sing to welcome them home. But the girls in the canoes didn't smile that day. They didn't tap their paddles on the gunnels in unison, like we always did. They didn't wave. They paddled slowly, not looking at us. Their faces were stone. One girl was missing, and that was when I saw a body in a tarp in a canoe, back by a counselor paddling at the stern. The camper had been swept under rushing water in a stream, pulled under by the current. She was there one moment, gone the next. I'll never forget the sight of those canoes coming back, and the somber, solemn, grim faces. For years, I wondered how that incident impacted the lives of campers on that fateful canoe trip. Eventually, I wrote a speculative psychological thriller, Cabin 8, that explores the theme of how young tragedy can leave a lasting mark, and how one might be forced to face our fears and shrug it off.